Welcome back to the Cineposium podcast. I'm Martin Ibarra-Ramos.
And I'm Alex Apicella.
Thank you for joining us for episode 4 of our third season of the show, this being our Halloween special episode, which is a separate seasonal episode from last week's fall special. If you haven't had the chance to check out that episode yet, please do. It features a great conversation on 2 stop-motion animated films, and we really enjoyed breaking down the films as well as their distinct animation styles. Both of these episodes, I think, are a sort of tribute to this season of the year. But now, Alex, why don't you let them know how the show works?
So here's how the show works. Every week we invite members or collaborators of Cineposium to curate a film for remote viewing, and then we have a conversation about the film right here on the podcast afterwards. New episodes are going to be published every Thursday with various members from Cineposium coming on to discuss the films of our weekly curators. This week we have a very special Halloween episode. We're actually dealing with 3 of the Halloween franchise movies. We call these ones the black sheeps of the Halloween franchise. Halloween Season of the Witch, and then the 2 Rob Zombie Halloween remakes. Season of the Witch is going to be presented by Martin, our very own. Halloween, the first of the Rob Zombie ones, is going to be mine, and then the second Halloween, the Rob Zombie ones, of course, is going to be Michael Mazzuccane's.
So, I wanted to talk about Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, in part because, although I absolutely love the original Halloween film, I've not seen several of its sequels, this one included. And prior to watching it, I'd heard of its place in the franchise as a sort of standalone offshoot, which had me very intrigued, and I'd heard of its sort of status now, at least, as like this cult favorite. And so I was really interested in checking it out. I mean, I don't know why this is the case, but with me, although I have like such favorites within various franchises, I've only seen like one of those films or 2 of those films. So I was sort of happy at this opportunity to watch something that I've been wanting to watch and talk about it on this podcast. So this is director Tommy Lee Wallace's 1982 film, the 3rd in the original Halloween franchise. And to offer a short synopsis of the film, kids all over America want silver shamrock masks for Halloween. Dr. Daniel Chalice and Ellie Grimbridge, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, stumble into a path to uncover a dark and destructive plot by Silver Shamrock owner Connell Cochran. So, we've all seen this film. I don't know if... I think I have a few talking points, and in part of that, we'll get into our sort of response to this film. So I think I'll start, rather than getting into our reactions of the film, I think I'll just start right into the talking points, because we'll naturally get into our thoughts on the film. So the first thing I want to talk about is the opening title sequence, because Halloween seems to be one of these film franchises in which it's known for its title sequences. It's something that has a very unique and just overall well-known style to it. And so I've only seen several films within the franchise. I've only seen one sort of version to this title sequence, in which, you know, you have the pumpkin and the credits, and in some, you know, in various cases different things happen with the pumpkin, whether we zoom in or it decays, or, you know, it comes back to life in the case of the Blumhouse one. But with this one, there is a pumpkin, but not until later on do we realize it's there. There's this sort of screen that this sort of texture of like a screen, like a TV screen, that appears, and there's these digital lines, and the score is playing over it, which I want to transition into next. But first, what I think that this title sequence does really nicely is, I think it's first, it speaks to what this film will be doing as a whole, which is essentially blending the old with the new. It embraces this film embraces much of the style of the original films, but incorporates new ideas into it, and I think this is like the first signal of that. I really appreciated how it felt different, but then slowly we start to see that these orange lines are eventually building this image of a pumpkin, which I thought was a really kind of neat way to, as I said, touch on the old but do it in a new way. So do you guys have any thoughts on this opening title sequence?
It's a I was reading up on it. Like they just shift the theme from a 10/8 structure to a 9/16 structure, which so like you can still kind of hear it in there, but really to me it's the visuals of the credit sequence that build up this kind of organic, inorganic sort of tension with the whole Shamrock Masks, Stonehenge rune thing that would eventually turn into the runes for the Curse of Michael Myers. And so the credit sequence does a really good job of just telling the viewer automatically what this movie's going to be about, but in this kind of amorphous symbolic way that is just it's just a really good credit sequence.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that this credit sequence is very good at setting like just the tone and then like the separation of the film as well because yeah, like you had said, Martin, the standard for like the Halloween franchise is, the do, and as like the pumpkin, is kind of like there, and it's like you don't get that. And then like even the pumpkin, like while being there, is like so elusive and like you don't really know. And the song is different, just like you said, Mike. And yeah, I don't know. See, like I'm so like entranced with like just the visuals of like this opening sequence that like I can't even begin to kind of like engage with like the musical portion of it. I just love this like bright blue script on like this orange like neon background that's kind of like fading in and out, and then it looks like it's like having like a I don't know, like war games type malfunction to it. It's like that kind of like really old computer. It's fantastic.
Yeah, totally. It definitely has that feel to it, which I really really enjoyed as well. I meant to bring up that there is this sort of like um I don't know, this like corrupted or this sort of interference involved with the visual, and I think the sound of the music heightens that even more. I think the two blend really well together. So I'm sorry, Alex, but we are gonna talk about the music now because it's the music in Halloween across the franchise has been something that I always love. And so in this case, the score is composed by John Carpenter and Alan Howarth. It's still very much a synth score akin to prior films, although as Alex noted just before we started this recording, it's not quite the Halloween theme, and something that I wanted to bring up was that it does feel like it. And so, Mike, the fact that you bring up that it's just like sort of timed differently, that makes a lot of sense because I do kind of sense similar notes and similar rhythmic like patterns in it, but it's just slightly different. And I get that sense across the film. Actually, there are other cues throughout. I won't name them, but if you go and listen to the score and you just kind of go through, if you recognize themes from the original film, you'll recognize them here, just feeling slightly different, but you'll have this sense of familiarity. And the music is something like this area just always shines within this franchise no matter what for me, and I, regardless of my feelings about any particular films, I think I always enjoy the scores, and we'll always play them regardless of if it's Halloween time or not. I'll just enjoy playing them in my room whenever I'm cleaning or whatever. So yeah, if you guys have any thoughts on the score in general and its place within this franchise.
I feel like this will be more relevant to my section, but like this is an interesting kind of remix to a degree because this is more electronic in a certain regard because the original is just piano, that I feel like kind of really emphasizes the idea of Season of the Witch as being slightly apart from the main franchise of like it's Halloween, and it's taking the core, what was going to be the core concept of the franchise, um uh in the direction that they originally intended. And so you have this sort of fun play with the symbolism of Halloween.
Yeah, I mean, I already had like vocalized some problems that I have, and I think that well, I don't have like a problem with the soundtrack itself. I have a problem with focusing on the soundtrack when the visuals of the film are so robust, and I feel like this film has like a lot of just really robust visuals and choreography just in general. It's not quite on the borderline of like a Giallo film, but like it definitely feels almost closer to like Giallo than like what it really should be, or like what you would expect out of a Halloween film. You know, you got like the guys in like the black gloves that are like, you know, coming in on people. And I think because of that, like the way that like Giallo films get me to pay attention to both their audio and their visuals by having like these really crazy soundtracks scored by Goblin that are like prog rock, like and like doesn't match up to the visuals, so it's like really dissonant. And I feel like that was what Season of the Witch was lacking for me to be able to like really engage with the soundtrack like a ton, just because like I was like, I can either listen to the film or I can watch the film, and I can't do both at once, if that makes any sense.
That does, and I think um, that's an interesting point to bring up, because I could totally see this going, the score going even further into that direction. That's a really great comparison, because I do think similar to Giallo stuff as well, although I don't have as much experience with it as you. I can see the comparison there. And I mean, although it's not really one of my particular talking points, I was hoping that at least it would come up briefly, is the visual effects in this film, which I was surprised. Some of those moments are just vicious. I mean, the ray through the face, my God. Like, I remember my wife Melissa and I just looking at each other after that, like, what just happened? Like, and I mean, that is something that I think could be compared to that other genre, but in a way, although I don't think we quite get some visuals like that in Halloween, I think there is a sense of brutality in general in Halloween that perhaps comes more so in the zombie films, as well as in the Blumhouse film, because I think that film is also at least discreetly really vicious, often through sound. But there are some moments where it's just kind of it's just really brutal. So I can see what you're getting at here, that there's a bit more to focus on in that way than the music. But I will say that a bit of it did feel like a sort of like synth rock kind of feel to it as well for me. But anyways, the last 2 points I wanted to get into before we move on to the zombie films. So Alex actually sent me an article from Film School Rejects that was I think was posted recently, and it was just conveniently about this film. So I read a bit of it, and I learned that John Carpenter and Deborah Hill only agreed on doing this film if they could take things in a different direction. And so instead of focusing on Michael Myers again, Carpenter wanted to expand the franchise around the Halloween holiday. And essentially he wanted to release a new Halloween themed episode every October, and it would have been this sort of anthology series with the holiday serving as the only connection between the films. And the box office totals didn't really respond to that installment, although it wasn't a total flop. It did make much less than its predecessors, and did not perform well against other horror releases that year. And there were many negative responses from critics at the time, although it does have this sort of cult following now, and even to that degree, critics now can express a lot of positivity toward the film. So I'm curious, before we get into the specifics of the film, just you guys' impressions or thoughts on the general idea of this concept, the anthology series centered on Halloween, and, you know, I guess treating the first 2 films as like its own installment to that idea. I don't know. Or it's like the Michael Myers segment of that Halloween anthology, and then the idea of continuing on. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like an interesting concept, and I wouldn't. I don't. I want to say almost that like the Halloween franchise is the first one that had attempted to really do that, because like the other franchise that like I think of that like tried to do something like this, like tried to antholicize, was actually the Exorcist franchise. And what ended up happening was that like the second film sank because it had zero connection to do at all with the first Exorcist film. And the third one also kind of sank in the box office, but has since become cult classic, which is kind of what's happened with Season of the Witch, where it is just like this really like highly appreciated cult film, but is still like very much viewed as very separately. Like you don't like usually if you're doing like a marathon of the Halloween franchise, you don't include Season of the Witch with that. That's something that like you would watch very independently, which is why like most people, when they call it when they're referring to the title of the film, like they just call it Season of the Witch instead of Halloween 3 Season of the Witch or Halloween 3, because it is so separate. And the same thing with like the Exorcist films as well. Like you don't watch The Exorcist, Exorcist 2, and Exorcist 3. You end up doing like The Exorcist and The Exorcist 3 is two very separate entities, even though they are somewhat connected. So yeah, it's like I am very curious about that, because like I think that having that franchise title connected to the film gives it like a sense of legitimacy. Like people liked Halloween, so they went to see this. But then at the same time, it creates this expectation. They liked Halloween and went to see this, and this was not Halloween. And so I think that that's why these films tend to fail. It's like I would like to see more film franchises do this, but I don't know that that's ever going to be like a really widespread or viable thing, just because of the way that it creates expectations.
Yeah, this is like I'd always heard the idea that they originally wanted it to be a anthology series, and to me this feels the most like a episode of Twilight Zone, because like you have an android show up, and like that kind of is the way they get around some of the graphic violence to a degree. And like the whole just it's a conspiracy movie, really, more than like a even like a horror movie. It's a conspiracy thriller that's a technophobe conspiracy movie. And so that like it feels so different from the just even the like moral aesthetics of Halloween 1. And like the threat of Michael Myers on the suburbs is now like not even an idea. It's like, no, here's just technology is the full threat. No longer is it the shape and a butcher's knife. It's crazy masks with bits of Stonehenge in them. Like this movie just goes places in 90 minutes that I respect. For nothing else, Dick Warlock is technically credited as the assassin android. And that's just a juvenile name, and I'm a juvenile person.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up like the genre shift there, because this is essentially like a whole different subgenre of horror than what Halloween originally was, right? We have like a slasher film in like the first Halloween films, and then this one's kind of more of like a pod movie, is like how I would describe it, as like a pod film, like what's the big one, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That's kind of like what we have here, is we have like a technophobic invasion of the body snatchers. And like an episode of the Twilight Zone, like you said, like that's sci-fi horror. That's what we're starting to kind of get into. And even like the opening sequence, when I think about it a little bit more, it kind of feels a lot like Videodrome, or like some of those other like tape films where like the evil comes from within the videotape, at least like in visual aesthetics. So.
That opening title sequence, it does feel like that. It does give that sense of like this sense of evil building within it. I totally agree with that. Just in a general sense, I kind of like the idea of an anthology series centered on Halloween, but when it's following something like the first two films, like the Michael Myers concept and the whole babysitter murder idea, I think that this installment, to get to the point of expectations, tried to, I think, please people who may have had those expectations too much, because although, as you said, Mike, it kind of in some ways escapes what they were doing with the first two films. They're still trying to stylistically have some familiarity with the first two films. There's like these android henchmen are sort of lurking in certain areas of the frame. We get certain cuts to a close-up with a sound like stinger that sounds very much like it was just pulled, like the exact same stinger pulled from the first film. And so there is still a sense of like sort of like watching and always being watched. I think it's even said as much in the film. And so I don't know, maybe had this been something even more so on its own, it would have done better. I don't like, as maybe again back to even the other point Alex made about the music. Perhaps if it would have gone totally for something else, that would have worked better. I'm not sure, but so this kind of naturally segues into my final point here was, and maybe we've already talked about it a little bit, but in terms of this particular concept of a film for an anthology series, is there anything else that you guys can think of that either worked or didn't work for me, I think something that was a cool idea was the idea of the Halloween mask as a means to reach victims. I like that idea. And perhaps that like a cult tied to that is interesting, and the fact that there's a broadcast tied to these chips that's meant to reach the victims. And something that I read as a sort of, negative part of the film is that, people don't really have an understanding of the motivation behind Connell Cochran, which I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if I need too much understanding of like, but why do you want all these kids to die? Like, I don't think I need that for a film, but I'm just curious if you guys have any, last thoughts on maybe what worked and didn't work in this, idea for this concept.
Yeah, going off of the motivations of Cochrane, I always think of this film. I think of Roger Ebert's quote. When he was reviewing the film, he was like, "What was Cochrane's plan? Was it to kill the kids or to replace them with robots?" Like we can't really tell. And I think that that's kind of like what makes this a fun cult film, is that like it is so like just ridiculous. It is so out there. It is, just like along the same lines of like I would sit down and I would watch this with the Slumber Party Massacre 2. Like it's just, this is just like, you can't think too hard about it. That's not the purpose of this film, is to not go in and then question like every single element of the plot. That tends to be something that like tears horror films apart, especially a lot during this era, where like it is just like let's just try out all these special effects and see what happens, or like let's just throw out a script and see what happens. And I think that like some of the craziness is like what I love about it. Like the parts where the mask wearer like does like gets brain damage from absorbing the radio waves of Stonehenge, which then like all these insects come out of the corpses. Like I'm like, what, like who was thinking about this? That's so crazy. But like I think that that's what's enjoyable, is that like at no point can you figure out like what is happening in this film, and sometimes you just need to like sit down and like relax and unwind and not work too hard to understand a film. You can just have fun.
Yeah, just turn your brain off and just accept what's happening. Totally.
And like that, like a noble evil, I feel like is like I want to do a kind of Thomas Schatz-esque genre study of like, no, Halloween 1 and Halloween 3 are generically connected through these sort of linguistic and symbolic similarities, and this is just a twist on this symbol, and that's why. But like it's just like it's a 90-minute horror movie. You can't. He wants to kill kids. That's what you should care about theoretically in Hollywood cinemas. He wants to kill the kids. Don't care about why. He just wants them dead.
Yeah.
And so it just, a lot of it is just like you go with it. I am on like, not on turn your brain off mode, but like you have to just like, it's a horror movie. Things are weird and operate on a surrealist level to a degree. And so like this one, taking that, but it's transporting it into technophobia, and like maybe if They Live hadn't come out, because this kind of gives me They Live vibes. This would have been reconsidered earlier.
Yeah, totally. So I mean, I guess that kind of wraps up my segment of this episode. So quickly, I'll just add that this film is available to stream on, I think, Cinemax Go, but then you can rent it at Apple TV and Prime Video, and you can also purchase it there. So hope you guys enjoy the film. And with that out of the way, next up is Alex with Rob Zombie's Halloween.
So another interesting installment in the question of where do we take an iconic franchise such as Halloween? What do we do to follow up with that notorious first film? And I think Rob Zombie has perhaps the most controversial version of that, because I think that when it comes to the Halloween Black Sheeps, Season of the Witch is one that has gained like a cult status, a cult notoriety. I'm not sure that Rob Zombie's Halloweens have really quite made it there yet. They're still kind of sitting on the outskirts of public opinion, not quite knowing what to do with these. And I feel like they will probably be like that for a little while. Just to give like the rundown, we're working with specifically the unrated director's cuts of both of the Halloween films. Me and Mike are. The reason why is because first of all, these are torture porn films, gore porn films. So as part of like my own personal philosophy, I will not watch an R-rated cut of a gore porn film because that is not the intended envisionment for the content of the film. Seeing these films like butcher cut by the MPAA kind of I feel like impacts the um the viewing experience because it literally is pulling away the visual content that you need to be there in order to get the effects. And then also we'll get into it later where these films actually completely diverge in ending based on the cut. So the unrated director's cuts are the ones that we're working with here. That being said, I am only interested in about the first 45 minutes of Halloween. Because this one's interesting. So it kind of tried to it did not diverge as much as what Season of the Witch did. What it tried to do was a remake, like a stroke for stroke remake, and then also a prequel, right? So the first 45 minutes of the film is essentially a prequel. It's expanding on those opening scenes of the initial film where we see little baby tiny Michael Myers, murder Judith in her bedroom. And so that first 45 minutes of Rob Zombie's Halloween is an expansion of that. Like what did the Myers family look like? What was Michael Myers's motivation, if we get that at all from the film? What was that Halloween night happening that was like leading up to that murder spree? And then how did essentially like how did Dr. Loomis and Haddonfield and like how did all of this kind of end up where we end up seeing it when Michael escapes from the asylum? So that's the first 45. The last this film's 2 hours long. The last like hour and a half almost of the film, the like bulk of the film is literally just a stroke for stroke remake. So if you want to watch like the original Halloween but you don't want the kills like jump cut it off the screen, this would be like the place to go because Rob Zombie has like some really really like vicious kills that like are great spins off of the original ones. So again, we're just going to look at like the first 45, and I think that probably some of the scenes that like stick with me the most are the interesting script. I don't know if it's script. I don't know if he wrote this. I don't have a copy of the script and I can't find one, so I don't know how much is ad-libbed. The interesting conversations surrounding the Myers family, because I think that one thing that Zombie does really well is dysfunctional families. So I'm interested in talking about that. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the camera work because Rob Zombie has such an interesting camera work going on in all of his films. This is really interesting cinematic gaze. And then we're going to look at whether or not we think that this is like something that's like worth visiting, like this history of Michael Myers. Like, do we need this? And like now that we have it, like how does this kind of change our approach to the film franchise or to the character? Does it change our approach? Maybe, I don't know. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk about dysfunctional families in Rob Zombie films. I just have to say, like, right off the bat that this film in particular makes me upset that Rob Zombie never made a remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Because I feel like the way that the family fights in this and like that would just be, wow, that would be beautiful for Rob Zombie to try to tackle.
Wow, that's a really great idea. I think I would totally be up for that based on this note that I think this is something that Rob Zombie's done really well, and I think something that's going to be a theme from me in talking about these films, which I have seen before but hadn't seen for a long time until we revisited these areas of these films for this episode. Something is that there's a lot to Rob Zombie's approach to filmmaking that I actually really love, and I don't remember feeling that way before film school. So I think there's something to that as well, which we kind of talked about a little bit before. But anyways, yeah, it's something that that I couldn't help but think about in revisiting this chunk of the first film here is that this family does appear extremely dysfunctional, and not to mention just this house is just a mess, and it's something I couldn't focus on. I don't know how anyone could live in, in any sort of grace, living in that sort of home with that mess. I certainly could not. But something that I was surprised to feel, and again, to your point, Alex, I'm not sure if this was intended, is how much I was in a way empathizing with Michael, because he does seem to have this side of him which we see more of at the start, that is much more gentle and sort of understanding and humanizing, and he's just a kid, and so innocence, I guess, is what's coming to mind now, and it's something that I guess makes sense if we're going to approach the prequel sort of origin story of a serial killer like Michael Myers. I guess when you consider true crime and what we know about serial killers, there's often these signs of dysfunctional families and this obsession with hurting animals and things like that. So I guess it makes sense, but I was surprised to kind of go back and experience this sort of treatment toward Michael from the stepfather and from the sister who leaves him, even though he was supposed to go trick-or-treating, which that's there in the OG film, if I remember correctly, right? Yeah. So, but I mean, there's a little bit more vulgarity in this that is not there in the original, and so that I think heightens my empathy for Michael. And obviously he talks here, which is also a difference too, but maybe we'll get into that later. But anyways, I think that's my main takeaway, that I empathize with young Michael so much here, and I'm not necessarily saying go kill them, you know what I mean, but like, I think there's certainly that feeling that's a little more substantial here for me, which I don't know how I feel about, but it's surprising and interesting, and I'm always here for variation in adaptation, so that's where I'll leave it for now.
There's a certain vulgarity to Rob Zombie's movies, his oeuvre, as they say, and even just like saying like he has an oeuvre is kind of like underlying the fact that he is a very, to a degree, vulgar filmmaker. Like there's jokes about abortion and basically the stepdad, what's he called, dumb fuck Ronnie, basically is acting, I guess you'd say, licentiously towards his stepdaughter person. Like, just it's very base, and then goes about 5 feet below that. And yet there's this kind of, I don't know if empathy is the right word, but like a kind of understanding gaze that Zombie creates for the environment that created Michael Myers in the end. And that sort of, it's that sort of like understanding of like, well, the cat, the killing of the animals is a sign, the dysfunctional family is a sign, but also like the unspoken class element to their family, and how that then impedes them socially in the world of the high school, or but the school that he's at, and everything, how that just kind of, it all just accumulates until we get this murder spree that starts off with a kill that I'm just like, you know what? Yeah, Ronnie dying and getting it, I'm okay with. It's actually like, but even that, like that feeling of satisfaction at like the compensatory morality of the slasher film, like as messed up as the morals of that genre are, like he at first twists it and you're like, yeah, and then he does that really interesting character thing if he puts you in the point of view of the victim, whereas original Halloween is all about putting you in the voyeuristic POV of Myers. And so it's this interesting inversion. He does that in the second film too, of putting you in the eyes of the victims, and you then watch yourself be murdered in this sort of graphic direct address that I found very arresting and like kind of like Season of the Witch, a interesting remix on the bones of Halloween.
Yeah, agreed. I was waiting for the shot behind the eye holes and the breathing sound design, and um, yeah, I was surprised to that sort of change in POV, which again, I think I respect that sort of shift. If we're going to adapt, although you guys will probably, I think you guys have already made this point that eventually it becomes Halloween, and that's maybe the less interesting part of this film. But these shifts are interesting and different, and I think perhaps yeah the better parts of it. But anyways,
Yeah, and it's like these shifts are like cataclysmic. Like this is the issue that like everyone had with these films was like these like very fundamental thing, like the vulgarity, like going from like the original Halloween where I don't even think that they use like a single like expletive in like the course of the entire film to like a 20 count of F slurs in like the first 45 minutes. It's quite a shift in content there. It's a shift in perspective from Laurie Strode being the main character to Michael Myers being the main character, even though he was always the point of view character in the films. And then like also kind of like yeah dealing with like the whole thing of like the backstory is that it's like is this like how do we look at Michael Myers just fundamentally different as a character if everything that like we've ever been told by Dr. Loomis that like he's just like that Michael Myers just woke up one morning and decided to go on a killing spree and he's not human and you can't reason with him and he's this like otherworldly creature.
he's the boogeyman, right? Supposedly.
Yeah, and so it's like what do you do with that now that you know that like the information given to you by one of the heroes of the original is no longer valid, that Michael Myers isn't a monster, he's the product of an environment that is monstrous. And I'm always like so fascinated by that, and I'm also like fascinated by like some people say that like the Rob Zombie films just in general, not just specifically Halloween, but like his filmography in general can't be realistic, that it's too over the top and exaggerated to be realistic. But I think that like using the um the exchange between Michael Myers and some of his classmates in the bathroom, that to me felt very realistic in terms of just like this is yeah like if your mother was working at a strip club and one of your classmates came across that newspaper clipping that was like advertising her work, like this would be the exact exchange that they would be having in the bathroom, and it would be very confrontational and it would end in a fight. So it's like what is like yes it's over the top, it's exaggerated, it's extra, but like there is also like these hints of like almost like uncomfortable reality where it's like you know that this is real, that like there are families like this, that like Michael Myers is a product of potential reality, and that like this is very exaggerated and then yet it's not.
Alex, I was wondering if maybe you could expand on something you said the other day, which was we mentioned that in the movie the original the finale to The Thing from the Other World plays on the screen, and you say you're like I'm not sure if that's part of the queer coding or just Zombie likes that movie. And I was wondering if you could make the case for the coding side of things, because like you said that I was like, oh, you know what, suddenly things make a lot more sense, or at least are a lot more interesting.
Yeah, so I'm always interested in like one of the primary elements of my work is like looking for queer coding in these slasher films or gore porn films or torture porn films, whatever the evolution is for the various time period in which it is released. And I think that I had always kind of gotten some, so whenever you other a character, just in general, like you are implying some type of a lack of conformity to like social norms, right? So when we start to other Michael Myers, there's a very specific way that the original film does that, and it seems to be very autistic coded. And we kind of get that as well in this one a little bit. He's not Michael Myers isn't completely nonverbal in this, but in the originals he's very much autistic coded. And what the Rob Zombie films ends up kind of like adding to that is like this layer of queer coding as well, where like very aggressively, like several times throughout the opening 45 minutes. Michael Myers' sexuality is called into question. Like his stepfather like calls him the F slur several times. The boys in the bathroom make a comment on it as well. He has longer hair than what even the original character does. The child actor for Michael Myers in the original Halloween movie has very short black cropped hair. And in the Rob Zombie versions, Michael has like long blonde hair that ends up staying long throughout the rest of the film as well, except it gets like discolored because of like grease and dirt and these films being very very nasty films, and Rob Zombie not being afraid to like really gore up his actors and characters and stuff like that. So like we're seeing like some markers here that are very interesting, and I think that one of the scenes that ends up standing out to me as well is the scene where we do actually see Michael Myers display a sexuality, and that's with his sister. And we can get into a lot of like incest coding when it comes to queer coding. That's something that's like very common, weirdly common. I don't know where that stems from, but like been seeing it even Mike, you're in my censorship class, we're seeing this even in 1930s classic gangster films. We're seeing like the same combination of queer sexuality in conjunction with incest. And so we get this like point of view shot of Michael behind his Halloween mask running his fingers up his sister's thigh, right? So there's like a lot going on here that I love to work with, and I haven't quite fully sussed out. But I think that Michael Myers having like being this faceless character, being like this white mask, kind of allows for a projection of self. And I think that that's kind of what Rob Zombie does as well. That's really, really good. Is just this projection of self and like putting yourself in Michael Myers' place and being like, if I was growing up here, would I kill my family, kind of thing, and kind of asking you to kind of personally resonate and relate and identify with this character in exchange that way. So
This is kind of after the 45-minute mark, but I really like how arbitrary he makes the masks, because like the whole thing about the Myers mask originally is it's a random Captain Kirk mask that I've never understood how that's a Captain Kirk mask, and in this one it just shows up randomly, and then he follows through on the mask bit and explains why Myers wants a mask, and then just like he gets that mask again, and that's why it's there. It's not just like it on some level. Like origin stories I kind of hate because they're like, we got to explain why the accoutrement of like it's the story of the getting of accoutrement and whatnot, and it's like that's not a real story, that's just plot. And in this, like he justifies it on on a intellectual level at least, that I really commend, because it's the kind of thing that would have been like the final shot, slow motion, put on mask, huh? Cut to black. And instead it's like, no, here it is, and we're going to make this a core part of how he sees himself.
Agreed. And I think, if I remember correctly, Judith, her boyfriend, brings the mask in and he brings it because he wants to have sex with the mask on. And so I think, although I'm not as experienced in this area of scholarship and research, but I think perhaps there's something to that as well in talks about sexual coding and him putting this particular mask on after that is established as like this sort of sexual act wearing the mask. But so that's just an interesting thing to think about for me as well in this whole area of thought here.
yeah, and I'll bring up also. I'm gonna check this really quick. Yes, so in Halloween Resurrection, this was also something that caused a huge debate slash scandal. So in Halloween Resurrection, we flash to Laurie Strode, who's like been confined in a psychiatric facility, who she had accidentally killed a man who she thought was Michael Myers, and so she's like dealing with that trauma, and in the process of like Michael Myers like killing her, they actually share a kiss. Like I haven't figured out quite what to do with that without like engaging with Rob Zombie's film like directly. I don't know how to like contextualize that within within the context of just the original original set of films themselves. But like, yeah, like they share a kiss. Like, I think it's actually Laurie that pulls Michael in for the kiss, and then Michael kills her immediately after, and that is the death of Laurie Strode. And that's how she dies for the first time of many times throughout these films. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that Rob Zombie is playing on from the originals, and I think that it's all stuff that people didn't want, but I find really fascinating. It's like, I think that it's a super interesting approach. Yeah, and then like, let's talk about the camera work going on here really quick, and then we'll transition into Halloween 2.
If I could jump in real quick, I mean, something that again, I watched these clips when we were watching them together with my wife Melissa, and something that we both couldn't help but point out was the constant use of handheld cameras and shifting back and forth between. And I don't know, there seems to be something to connect that to Michael's sort of mental state, in which, you know, as we start to see him at the I guess it's a hospital or asylum of sorts, in which he kind of shifts back and forth between not remembering and then kind of just like this. There seems to be some sort of shift in stability, and I thought that was really interesting, and appreciated that as this sort of style to bring to this film, because although I do think there are moments in the original film with handheld, I don't think it's to this degree right away, even in moments of, like, you know, just what is in the beginning of this film, just a family sort of talking together. There's no need for that, but yet there's moments throughout where he's sticking to it, and I thought that was a really interesting thing. But there's also some other moments as well that I thought were just really brilliant shots. Like, there's one after I think Michael doesn't get to go trick-or-treating, he just kind of sits out front of his home, and I think I commented to both of you guys, it's just a gorgeous shot that's really evocative of what's going on with him internally, and sort of speaks to the stakes of what's to come. I thought that I think there are many shots, and I'm really curious to rewatch the entire film too. I guess spend some time looking at some compositions here, because although, as you guys say, I think, yeah, eventually the film becomes just sort of an essential Halloween remake. I think that there are these bits and moments of what seems to be Rob Zombie's mind into what's going on within this narrative, and these moments that are just really rich in emotion, and perhaps that goes to his experience as a musician, and I'm not really sure, but I think there are some particular frames that I think are just really, really beautiful.
Oh, and there's so many beautiful shots, and I think that that's something that needs to be looked at a lot more, is Rob Zombie's like auteur style when it comes to Halloween, because this is a Rob Zombie film, even though it is Halloween. And there's something that, like, I always like jokingly kind of complain about when I work with films from this decade, is that I'm never allowed to look at a shot that has a tripod, that like no one is mounting their cameras on anything. And I think that the shaky cam kind of characteristic of like gore porn and torture porn that's coming out of like these early 2000s, I think that is very much like Rob Zombie's influence on the genre, and it's been a lingering influence, and I think that that's so important to take a look at.
And speaking to camera work as photography, I think, you know, there's also I think a lot to be said about lighting and about color as well, because you know, when we're in the room, I mean inside the house, there's a particular I want to say a more warmer feeling to it, but then to jump to that shot I was just referencing where he's sitting outside alone, it's very dark and it's very blue, you know, and so I think that there's these very purposeful transitions in color to again heighten emotion, and so I think he's very cognizant of that, and I love that you sort of reference him as an auteur, because I mean, how can you not? These all are very artistic choices, whether we think Rob Zombie is, consciously making them, or just kind of going with it, regardless their decisions being made. And I think, in terms of how maybe the director wants me to feel in these moments, I certainly felt that way. It was very successful for me. And so, if the idea was to feel sort of uncomfortable, and perhaps, trapped in the home, but then outside feeling sort of somber and alone, I think that was very successful. And so I certainly appreciate some of the decisions that are being made here on an artistic level, for sure.
Yeah, all the more reason to check out and watch the film. You can find a version of this film streaming on Amazon Prime. You do have to be careful to check the versions, because there are significant difference between the R-rated cut and the unrated director's cut, including like several whole scenes that are changed up. And a lot of, like, you end up missing a lot of the really cool gore effects. I think Rob Zombie has like a really beautiful just way to do blood and way to do like hits within like the first 45. We get Judith's murder, and like Michael doesn't just stab her once, he keeps stabbing, and he stabs again, and then he stabs again, and he stabs again, and like you sit there and you're like, oh my god, like, can you stop stabbing her, like she's dead. Like you start to like get really like, so it's part of the effect. So you want to watch the unrated cuts of these to like really feel the experience. And with that, moving on to Halloween 2, Mike, tell us more.
Well, love hurts, you guys. That's what I'm here to tell you about.
Love hurts. Ooh, love hurts. Ooh, love hurts.
To be a little less trite, when we did our little like, let's compose like 15 minutes of this movie that I like and distill it down into essence, I cut out basically all the killing. It's like, I'm not like you, Alex. I am not what I would consider a horror fan. I consider myself to be a big old wimp. Scary movies are scary because they nakedly manipulate you into feeling emotions that I just don't want to feel. That said, like, I really love this movie. Like, the editing by Glenn Garland, who did the editing on the first one, there's just really nice parallel editing and like parallel edits with match cuts that really just drive the idea home of either Michael and Laurie having some sort of connection, or just like Michael as this sort of elemental essence. There are these really good match cuts that kind of, in a way, juxtapose this idea of family and trauma in most movies is this thing that you overcome. It's a hill, and you go up the hill, and then it's a plateau, and you're there. And what I really love about this movie, and like, it's not like the most, I don't know, accurate to PTSD and trauma studies, but there is a real kind of willingness to go like, no, Laurie is messed up and not reacting very well, and Anne, who she's living with, is also reacting to her situation of being violated just as much, if not more so, than Laurie, in a completely different way, where she has become a health conscious fitness freak, whereas Laurie is becoming self-destructive and has turned her bathroom into a shrine to Alice Cooper. And then in the middle, you just have Sheriff Brackett, who, like, the character of Sheriff Brackett has never been well in any of these movies. Like, that's one of the main points in the 2018 Halloween was just, it's not a good idea. And you just, there is a real humanity to Brad Dourif's performance as this dad who's trying to hold his new family together, and just, it's a bad day, kind of like the first film. It's just a bad day, and it's not going well. and his daughter is embarrassed with him. His other daughter is playfully antagonistic towards him. And then it just all goes to hell, and you just get this guttural scream of just anguish when he sees Annie's body. And that's like one of, to me, the biggest difference is in the Halloween, in the director's cut to the theatrical cut, is the director's cut restores this man's just scream of anguish that is just, it's haunting. Like, it reminds me of the sound that the guy who plays Cedric Diggory's dad in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire makes when he sees that his son is dead before him. Only like it's 1,000 times worse because it's just her mutilated body. And it just like, we have this idea that like Zombie doesn't do maybe character work very well, or like actor work, because he's just very vulgar and base. But like there's a certain kind of like love hate antagonistic understanding between Laurie and Annie in this movie that I really like, feels both very sisterly and also just like someone who like, I cannot we're talking about program. I was like, I can't quit you because we are connected by this traumatic event that has fucked us both and we are trying to live with. And through that shared connection, like we can't not deal with each other in the end. And then she's just brutally murdered, and her death with Laurie is just this really sad moment. Like, I most of the time in these movies I'm like, haha, you deserve to die, because it's a slasher movie. Like, for the part of the problem with that genre is it got too self-aware of just giving us teenage assholes to see get killed and be like, haha, you deserve it. And in this one you just feel bad. And like, that's kind of just the opening hospital sequence where they just go through the surgery. You just feel bad. Like it's the thing that Halloween 2 does, is like it deals with the trauma in a way a slasher movie sequel hasn't. In a degree, it's an excessive way, but there's a certain kind of honesty to it that I really, that's what attracts me to this movie.
And this is what's going to get me yelled at by every single person on the planet, is that I think that Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 actually handles trauma a lot better than the Blumhouse remake. Although the Blumhouse remake does have a huge emphasis on intergenerational trauma, which like obviously that looks different than what Rob Zombie is trying to portray, which is like crisis trauma. But like, yeah, it's like I think that this is much more effective to me in convincing me that this experience was not something that Laurie walked away from unharmed. And I think that vulnerability in character is something that I was missing from the Blumhouse Halloween, is that it's like, what is Laurie doing 20 years later because she's traumatized, building a house of murders, or on the bathroom floor, like not able to get up or move because she keeps having, PTSD based flashbacks. There's just two different portrayals going on here of what trauma is. And I don't know. I think that the Rob Zombie one hits harder for me. I think that one's the one that like makes me feel like I understand that Laurie is in this position. I don't quite understand the trap house of horrors that she's conducted to kill Michael.
Yeah, and I feel like it's whatever trauma is there between the generations, although I like the intergenerational segment of or concept of that film, it does feel like it's all directed at that, like, that final moment in the film in which Laurie has built this setup for Michael, right? Whereas this feels much more just about feeling the trauma. And so, yeah, I think I can agree with that. Totally. And I think that this just all is kind of getting back to my feelings that I've already stated about how it seems, and I'm surprised to say, but it seems that Rob Zombie has done a really fabulous job of having us focus on characters and wanting us to feel a certain way, but doing it in a way that doesn't necessarily feel on the nose, and not for me at least, because I think that when there's decisions made to have us feel through the devices available via filmmaking rather than just dialogue, or sort of obvious sort of narrative trajectory. I think it just makes it much more effective for me as a viewer. And so I just totally agree with you guys' sentiments on how trauma is treated here. I think it feels much more grounded, much more introspective, and
I love that, but at the same time, we also need to just recognize Ghost Mom exists in this movie, along with Ghost Young Michael Myers, and just so like there's like that surrealistic edge to him that I get from his music videos that comes through in this movie that I really dig. Of like, yeah, Sherry Moon Myers or Sherry Moon Zombie is just there because reasons due to the psychic horse and purity and rage and stuff. That is like it's weird, but you know what? It fits the movie as this like slow creeping surrealistic crisis that occurs and that manifests itself all the way up until we get to that weird just standoff in a barn. And that's also where like the theatrical cut and the director's cut diverge the most, is the endings are totally different. And I like one aspect of the theatrical cut ending, which ends with Laurie coming out with the Myers mask on, and then it cuts to her in an asylum with the creepy, scary Love Hurts cover playing over the background. And like, I would be so here for a Rob Zombie 3 where Laurie is the killer. Like, I just find like we don't have that many female slasher villains in general anyway. I think that would have been interesting. But there's also the director's cut ending that ends with her shot to death, essentially. Like, you can make the argument, is she alive, is she not alive, because it's a slasher movie. They're all just mostly dead. But they're like, that feels more interesting and sidestepping of like genre conventions of character, like just not even genre conventions, just franchise conventions of, we're going to kill Michael Myers and we're going to kill Dr. Loomis and we're going to kill Laurie Strode, and they're just going to lay in this triptych of death and trauma. And yeah, it's a very different ending to a Halloween movie that you're built to expect, like, oh, they're going to make 7 of these. And so he's just like, no, I'm going to make mine with an ending. And maybe we'll make a second one. And I wish they kind of had.
I'm always a fan of these endings that are open to interpretation. And I guess maybe even a little fun speculation. But, you know, I think I agree. I would totally be here for a third film in which she's the killer, because to your point, there's not many of that kind, and it's just very different from what we've seen here. You know, it feels like a way to take it into a new direction that I think is much more interesting for fans of the Michael Myers Halloween. And so I have seen this film once before. I don't know. I think ultimately what I liked is something that you pointed out before, was that sort of match cut in which there's the mask and then there's the face. And I think that kind of points attention to the fact that there's this new face of Halloween in a way that I think was effective for me and gave me a certain chills that I think I totally would buy that there would be a new direction here to take. In terms of whether or not she's dead, I think I still need to think about that, because I don't know, Alex. I think you had thoughts on this before, so maybe you can take it from here. But I'm not totally sure what I think of that yet. So maybe I'll chime in as you talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that this is, it's not, my goal in life isn't to sit here and like shit all over the Blumhouse films, but I feel like the zombie film gets so close to what I wanted out of the Blumhouse film, which is like this image of Laurie as like an unhinged killer, and we get so close to that. We get so close to that in the Blumhouse films. So like, I guess it's like, if you like the Blumhouse film, I would recommend like thematically examining some of these films, because like they have like the same kind of like like thread to them. And so it's like when I watch the final ending, I love the director's cut. I love to see like Laurie like stumble out like of the shack and look down at Loomis and like gonna kill him. Like I love that. I love that that image of Laurie with a knife. Especially like Laurie with a knife with perhaps like intent to kill, and not just, you know, to be holding a knife or in self-defense, like an active Laurie. And like I wish almost like the two endings had been combined, because I feel like if she had stumbled out of the building with the knife and the mask on, that would have been that would have been just like ideal. As for like whether she's dead, I always have read it as she died in the shooting. Um and then like the question comes up like, well, if she died in the shooting, what is like that next scene where it's like she's in like the white hospital room and she's in the straitjacket, and how do you like contend with that? And I kind of take it as almost like a purgatory, right? Because who else is in that room? It's Sherry Moon Zombie, Michael Myers' mom. Her mom is also in that room with her. And so like I do take that as almost like an afterlife symbolism. Now, whether or not that's kind of like an intention of Rob Zombie, I don't know. I don't know where he stands on like religion or religious symbolism in his films. Because I know that like some directors like David Lynch are very like, no, don't read, you know, certain aspects of religion into this. This isn't about that. That's not what I believe in. So it's not, you know, congruous with like the image of the film. But like, yeah, that's how I interpret it, is that, you know, Laurie gets shot by the police and dies and ends up in like this purgatory space. Her mental state throughout the film was never fully there in the first place. So when she dies, why would it just miraculously come back to her, you know? So she's stuck in this purgatory.
Perhaps, I mean, yeah, and maybe if it's not purgatory, it's just a reference to the fact that Laurie has became this at the end at the end, right? I mean, like, which is enough for me. I think you're totally right. I do enjoy a lot about the Blumhouse film. I do, but you're totally right that this feels like so much more. I don't know exactly what the word is, but interesting or effective, or I'm not sure. But Laurie falling into this due to her trauma, falling into this place is really interesting. And feels a little, again, to go back to something else I said, less on the nose than like the battle between good versus evil, and the good eventually having the last punch in the end to win in the way that it does in the Blumhouse film. Although I guess we're getting a sequel, and so Michael survived that little trick. But
yeah, but I mean, like it is predicated on like the premise that Michael is evil and therefore Laurie is good, and you just don't get that dichotomy as clearly in the Rob Zombie films, going back to the first one, where they make you identify with Michael Myers and they explain, you know, what got him to this point. You can't be like, well, he's totally evil. It just doesn't work. So like you can't have that discourse in the film.
Yeah, I like that there's like a call to think, as opposed to just like, this is this. No, it's rather it's much more complicated than that. And as emotions are, and as trauma is, right? So, yeah, really interesting stuff.
One last thing, Tyler Maine's just excellent line reading of the immortal line, "Die," is just great.
Michael, for God in heaven, die!
That needs to just be noted. He's silent the entire movie, and then he gets one line, and then he dies.
And as like evidence that Rob Zombie can't do anything that isn't controversial, you know, just having Michael Myers say one word, just one word got him like shat on so much. Like, oh my God, he talked the whole first 45 minutes of the original, and y'all are gonna get on him for one word in the sequel.
All right, well, guys, I think that about wraps up this triple feature conversation on the Black Sheep films of the Halloween franchise. This has been a lot of fun. Hope you all enjoy these films and enjoy this conversation. We hope you'll continue to join us for the rest of this season of virtual programming. Please subscribe to the show on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at Cineposium and on Twitter at Cposium to keep up with our updates and to keep in communication with us. Thank you all again for listening. Until next week, take care, everyone, and happy Halloween.
Piano that I feel like kind of really emphasizes the idea of Season of the Witch as being slightly apart from the main franchise of like it's Halloween and it's taking the core, what was going to be the core concept of the franchise, um uh in the direction that they originally intended. And so you have this sort of fun play with the symbolism of Halloween.
I just can't. Like, I just.
So do you want me to take that from the top, or
You did good. You did good to finish off before we broke into that. I think we're fine. I think Alex, if you have anything to say about it, I think you'll be good to just jump in.
Yeah, so the music. Yeah, I mean, I already had like vocalized some problems that I have, and